this video, we will continue to explore business ownership. We will look specifically at public limited companies, sometimes referred to as PLCs. So, starting a business is an exciting moment for any entrepreneur. The ownership structure that you choose for your business will have significant implications on the kind of liability that you have, the amount of tax that you pay, the amount of paperwork involved, and even your ability to raise finance. More established businesses may choose to form a public limited company. But before we go into more detail, let's make sure we understand what a public limited company actually is. Just like the private limited companies, which we have looked at in other videos, a PLC is an incorporated business, a company, registered with the government. The key difference between a private and a public limited company is that shares can be sold to the public. To all the teachers out there, show all of these videos without any ads and gain access to our growing library of over 500 teaching worksheets. Why not visit BizzWizard.co.uk to find out more? Public limited companies are usually listed on the London Stock Exchange, meaning that anybody out there can buy and sell shares in the company. These shareholders become part owners of the business. They now have a vote in how the business is run. A public company will usually have a chief executive officer, a CEO, and a board of directors who manage and oversee the entire operation on behalf of all the other shareholders. There are so many examples of businesses that are public limited companies: Apple, Tesco's, Deliveroo, the list goes on and on. But you might now be thinking, how do I become a public limited company? Is it nice and easy? There are a number of key conditions that must be met before you can go through the process of selling your shares on the stock exchange. This process is known as flotation. Firstly, there must be at least 2 shareholders. There will need to be a share capital available of £50,000. The company needs to be registered with Companies House. There will need to be at least 2 directors, and they must have a qualified company secretary. Setting up as a public limited company is not an easy process. It's not going to happen overnight, and it involves a large amount of paperwork. Before we start to examine this type of ownership in more detail, let's first introduce this video's main example. This is Erica Horton, and she is one of the directors of Vantage Entertainment Limited. Vantage is a chain of popular cinema complexes operating throughout the UK. They have achieved ongoing financial success, and the private limited company are now considering becoming a public limited company to allow them to sell their shares to the general public. Bring this video and over 100 more to life with fun, interactive games, quizzes, and case studies. Why not try the first 25 completely free by visiting BizzWizard.co.uk. You should note that becoming a PLC does not necessarily mean that the company is on the stock exchange. To achieve this, Vantage Entertainment would need to go through the process known as flotation. Once this process is complete, Vantage Entertainment could then generate additional finance by selling shares to the general public. Vantage Entertainment Limited currently have a total of 27 shareholders in the company. However, as a public limited company, they would likely have hundreds, if not thousands, of shareholders who each own a small piece of the business. There are even some public limited companies out there who have hundreds of thousands of shareholders. So, if Vantage Entertainment decide to become a PLC, you could buy shares in the business. I could buy shares in the business. Your parents could buy shares. If you buy a share, you are now a shareholder, an owner. Even though this might be a tiny piece, it's your piece and it belongs to you. But why would we do this? Why would we spend our hard-earned cash on pieces of a business? What's our reward? Each of the video courses over at BizzWizard.co.uk also includes an interactive business case study that applies the knowledge learned to a real-world scenario. There are over 1,000 multiple-choice questions, each with detailed feedback, which tests students' understanding of the content. Why not visit BizzWizard.co.uk to find out more? Well, buy a piece of a successful business and you should get a nice dividend payment every year. This is your share of the profits. If the business does well, then your dividends should be higher. You should get more money. Many of these shareholders will simply want to see the business making large profits and hope for a nice dividend payment arriving in their bank account. Make sure you remember this important key term. It's going to really help you out if you ever have to discuss the impact of a company's decision on its shareholders. So, let's take a look at both the advantages and the disadvantages of becoming a public limited company. Firstly, but arguably most importantly, as either a private or a public limited company, Vantage Entertainment have limited liability. As we have discussed in other videos, this means that shareholders are not held responsible for any debts against the business, and their possessions, their wealth, would not be at risk if the business found itself in financial difficulty. Think of liability as your legal responsibility. If this liability, this legal responsibility is limited, this means that you will not be held responsible if the company is sued or goes bankrupt. When you think about it, this makes sense. Would you be willing to buy shares in a new medication if there was a risk that in the event patients were ill, they could sue you personally? Probably not. Playing the stock market would be a much riskier process if your own personal possessions, your house, your car were on the line. Next up, as a public limited company, they may find it easier to raise finance. As a PLC, it will be much easier to raise substantial amounts of finance as shares can now be sold on the stock exchange to the public. For Vantage Entertainment, this means they will have the opportunity for further expansion because they will be able to raise much more capital, which can go towards opening new locations and gaining market share within their industry. As a public limited company, Vantage Entertainment is likely to attract more press, as the public are more invested in what's going on with a PLC. Due to this increased public presence, Vantage Entertainment may see an increase in ticket sales, and these funds will then be available to be used in other areas of the business, such as marketing or innovation of existing goods and services. Public limited companies are more reputable, meaning they have more of a presence and they're more trusted in society. Vantage Entertainment will be able to use this to their advantage, as it may impress potential customers who could decide to use their cinema chain over competitors. As a public limited company, many investors may be more likely to purchase shares in Vantage Entertainment than if they remained a private limited company. This is because they may have increased confidence that they will be able to sell their shares for a higher price in the future. So as you can see, there are many benefits for Vantage Entertainment of choosing to operate as a public limited company. But many famous companies over the years have reverted back to a private limited company. Why might they do this? To answer this question, we will now look at some of the key disadvantages of operating as a public limited company. The first downside that we will consider is sharing all the profits, in the form of dividends, to all those shareholders. Every time you take on a new shareholder, you now have to split your profits into one more piece. As you can imagine, if you have thousands of shareholders, you will be splitting the company profits up into thousands of pieces. If the company agree to pay out dividends, which they might not always do, this will mean that there are less profits available for other business activities, such as expansion or improving advertising. As we have already discussed when looking at the advantages of choosing to form a PLC, this type of business is likely to get more publicity than a sole trader, partnership, or even a private limited company. As the public can buy shares in this business, they are therefore more interested in what the company is up to. In most cases, this can be a good thing and lead to increased sales. However, as the company is now in the spotlight, any mistakes may be of more interest to the press. This increased interest could inevitably lead to very bad publicity for the company in the event that they get wrapped up in some kind of scandal or particularly poor customer service. In another video, we looked at private limited companies and we discussed that one of the key advantages is keeping control over who is able to purchase shares in the company. With a public limited company, this is not the case. Anybody can purchase a share and will then have a vote, a say in how the company is managed. Shareholders and the directors have no say over who is able to purchase shares in the business, as they are available to the entire public. The original owners have at this stage lost control of the business, which is now controlled by all of the shareholders. To help you understand what I mean, let's look at an example. Back in 2016, Argos, the popular retailer, which operates 800 stores around the UK, was purchased by Sainsbury's, the supermarket chain. This does not mean that the directors of Argos, or in fact the founders of the company, wanted to sell the business to a company such as Sainsbury's, but basically Sainsbury's offered £1 billion to buy the retailer, and all of the shareholders felt that this was such a good offer that they couldn't refuse. It's important to know that in the event that one company or individual purchases more than 50% of the shares in a company, they will now have the majority control and can actually take over the business. This is a significant risk of operating as a public limited company and should be something that you give careful thought. For Vantage Entertainment, if they choose to become a PLC, the original owners of the business would no longer have full control. They might be seriously unhappy with the direction that the business ends up taking due to decisions voted in by the many new shareholders in the company. The final disadvantage that we will consider is that these businesses are simply more regulated than other business structures such as sole traders, partnerships, and even private limited companies. There is considerably more paperwork to complete, and this must be filed with the correct organisations, or the company risks serious fines and even, in some cases, legal action. The creation of these documents can be costly, and it is a serious factor that Erica and the team at Vantage Entertainment will need to consider. Do they have the necessary processes and people in place to be able to complete all of this paperwork accurately and at the correct time? So, there you have it. This is just the basics of what's involved in forming a PLC. As you can see, the decision to operate as a public limited company is a very serious one, and it will be extremely important that Vantage Entertainment carefully considers both the advantages and the disadvantages that we have discussed before making their choice. Remember that choosing the most appropriate form of business ownership is by far one of the biggest decisions that you will make as an entrepreneur, so it's vitally important that you get this decision right. Until next time, this has been the BizzWizard. See you in the